I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, oil at sea, the economic and ecological disaster that's unfolding after an explosion on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Also, Greek austerity protests turn deadly. We ask if the euro is on its last legs. And despite losses and bankruptcy, US airlines, or at least two of them, just get bigger and bigger. It is an oil spill with the power to shape both the economy and ecology with catastrophic effects. It also has the potential to change the way big oil operates off the coast of the United States. So this week, we'll count the cost of the US Gulf Coast's oil spill. And we're going to start with the big oil operators because in a situation like this, and it's BP we're looking at specifically this time, the responsibility lies with them for the cleanup and for the impact on coastal business and tourism. Have a look at these numbers. BP's share price has slumped 20%, a staggering $30 billion since the explosion on April 20 that, let's not forget, killed 11 workers. To put that 30% though in perspective, BP earned almost $40 billion in 2008 and 2009, and in the first 3 months of this year, $6 billion. Analysts predict the final cost, that's clear up legal suits, could be $15 billion to BP. In comparison, rival ExxonMobil spent more than $4 billion 21 years ago when the Exxon Valdez spilled oil off the coast of Alaska. Now, BP has deployed a massive container to try to trap hundreds of thousands of litres of oil gushing into the Gulf. The 100-ton concrete and steel box is to be lowered to the seabed and used to funnel oil to a ship on the surface. So many people hoping that will make a difference and limit any further damage. Now let's get into it. David Foster is reporting from the various scenes of this disaster. He has this report now in which he, a scientist and a businessman, head out to survey the damage.
The waters of the Gulf of Mexico bring together two people, each with so much to lose. On board, the sports fishing boat captain, who's seeing his business go under, quite literally. And the marine scientist whose concern is keeping the creatures alive until the captain can catch them. We head 25 kilometers off the Louisiana coast, an area where the gas and oil rigs are a string of floating towns. There's long-term damage to consider, but there's tomorrow and the next day too, which bring their own concerns.
Our business is suffering dramatically. Our clients are calling and canceling. We're not rebooking anything, and unfortunately this is the time of year where we book most of our year up. The next 4 months is when we make all of our money for the year, and unfortunately it looks like that's not going to be available to us. It's going to hurt our business dramatically.
The clumps of oil that they're trying to break up are jokingly referred to on board as chocolate mousse. Then there's what's been pushed down, what now lies beneath. But on the real job, real as in fishing, the worry now is what damage the shiny surface coating will bring to the marine youth of tomorrow.
The danger to that of that particular sheen would be to larval constituents in the water, and those larval constituents are actually...
The larval constituents being sort of very young fish.
Very young fish and crustaceans and all sorts of stuff that is actually at the whim of the current. And so they do not escape from this particular contaminant.
It's another working day for the skipper and the scientist in extremely unusual times. Both admit, though, they'll just have to accept what's coming their way.
Right, let's bring someone else into the conversation now. Nick Clark, you'll know him as a news anchor here on Al Jazeera English, also a terrific environmental reporter, Nick, of course, and you went to the States last year for your documentary Losing Louisiana, which sounds very dramatic.
Absolutely. Well, that says it all, really, doesn't it? We were right there in the heart of it. And you know that phrase that environmentalists use, the delicate and fragile balance of ecosystems and so forth? Well, this place is beyond that. It's on its knees. The communities that are still there, and a lot of them have gone, are just hanging on by their very fingertips. You go through this area, you'll see roads that are submerged in water. You'll see telegraph poles just bend over sideways, their lines looping into the marsh. At one point, we're going along in a boat and we collided into something, and it transpired it was a submerged gravestone, a cemetery that had been underwater for not that long. It's all happening very quickly. Why is it happening? There's two principal reasons. One of those is good old oil exploration. They've carved up the wetlands, And what that has done is prevented this natural barrier that used to be there from protecting the shoreline. And consequently, when you get storm surges and big hurricanes like Katrina, well, we all know the damage that they can do. The other thing is the Mississippi itself. The Mississippi built these wetlands over millennia, thousands of years, billions and billions of tons of silt deposited every day, every week, every month, every year into the wetlands and built them up. Man comes along and then channels the Mississippi, built great big levees to stop the water flooding, but consequently there is no restoration of the land. All the silt goes out to sea. And you can get a very good impression of what it's like by taking to the skies, which is exactly what we did.
There's a lot going on down there. Pollution, dredging, channeling, oil exploration, land loss, throw in global warming, and you've got a pretty perilous cocktail.
At one time, these waters were completely blanketed in green, a natural defense against storm surges. Through the years, deep channels were cut for commercial navigation and oil pipelines. With that, more and more salt water began flowing into the wetlands, poisoning the entire ecosystem of the natural marshlands. As the fresh water turns to salt water, ecological changes swiftly follow. And with that, a profound impact on the lives and livelihoods of the Cajuns, especially for those in the shrimping industry.
The estuaries are the food base of every species between here and the Gulf. It all starts in the marshes. So once we lose our marshes, the food base erodes and everything else just goes.
Louisiana shrimp need the freshwater marshes to mature before heading out into the Gulf. Now they're running out of room. As a consequence, the fishing season is increasingly shorter. Coupled with an influx of cheaper, foreign-bred shrimp saturating the US market, local fishermen have nowhere to turn. Add to that more than $300 million in damage caused to the local industry by the last 2 hurricanes alone, and these fishing boom towns of years gone by have all but gone bust.
I don't want to be critical of my federal government, but they really did do a whole bunch here.
Brent Konstrancic is a harbour policeman. He took us to a place where many believe the only hope to save southern Louisiana lies. Port Fourchon is a cluster of sport fishing camps in a gated community surrounded by huge docks. It is a city of ships in the marshes, with supply vessels for the 500 or more oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico. A third of America's oil and natural gas come through here, accounting for half of the nation's refinery output. But despite all of this industrial capacity, just a small slice makes it into the coffers of the state. Out of the $7 billion in revenue, Louisiana receives less than 1%. There is a congressional plan to reroute funds to states like Louisiana, but not until 2017. Many observers say that will simply be too late.
When I was a little boy, my grandfather used to say, this was the bank. If you needed money, you went to the bank, caught it, sold it, and got your money. But it's not like that anymore. Government regulation, saltwater intrusion, habitat destruction, you know, and these guys here, they're all dying, they're getting old, and there's no one wanting to take their place. My generation or the next generation may very well be the last of this culture.
So what we see there, Nick, in that report, the gentleman there just saying habitat destruction, and that was however many months ago. Now we've got this very acute oil disaster happening. I mean, any thoughts, any ideas on how this is going to affect those people, the shrimpers there?
Right, absolutely. There are numbers that are coming through, but one group of people that will be specifically affected by this are the Atacapa people. They're an indigenous group of Native Americans that, their numbers have already been decimated by what we've been talking about already. And for them, their bread is on the waters. They're fishermen, they're shrimpers. And if the waters get oiled up, what option have they got? There's nothing else for them. So that's one thing. The flip side of that, you stand on a spit of land and you can look out to sea and you'll see hundreds, especially as night is falling, hundreds of flares on the horizon. These are all the rigs that you can see. I think there's something like 600 in a 40-mile radius. So it's the balance between the two. It's a very important employer for the area, the oil industry.
Well, that's the crux of the matter, isn't it? The fact that, and I think even those shrimpers and fishermen would acknowledge that without the oil there, the economy would pretty much fall apart. You've got to, as you say, strike a balance.
Exactly. But then it is having an effect. And we're talking about numbers. We've got certain things that have come through. People just a bit of a shot in the dark, but they're coming up with some figures. The Hart Research Institute for the Gulf of Mexico Studies, which is a part of Texas A&M, they kind of ecology research unit. They reckon that the damage done to fishing and tourism is already $1.6 billion. And commercial fishing, remember, in some parts of the Gulf has been shut down completely already. $2.5 billion is the cost of fishing, says the investment firm Bernstein. And then you've got the impact on tourism. Think of the coast of Florida, a big tourist hub. If the oil reaches those shores, it's going to be a massive problem. In the wetlands themselves, not so much tourism, but you've got a lot of fishing camps there. A lot of weekenders come to the area to fish and so forth. If the waters are oiled up, that's not going to happen. It's going to hit the local economy. No petrol stations providing gas, grocery stores and so forth. And then you've got the issue of if the slick actually moves west into the port area and hits the docks, because this is a big hub for overseas foreign oil coming into America. And if all those ports and docks are closed up, then you've got a massive problem.
Oil giveth, oil taketh away. Nick Clark, thank you for coming to the studio. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
When Counting the Cost returns, we'll take a look at so-called vulture funds that prey on the world's weakest economies. And of course, more from Greece. The bailout's in place, but so are the protests over those harsh austerity measures from the Eurozone and the IMF. That and plenty more in a moment. Welcome back to Counting the Cost, your weekly business stop here on Al Jazeera. We turn to Greece now, which has had the whole world on a spin with its debt and austerity dramas. So much so that when an apparent technical glitch on Wall Street caused a major drop on the Dow Jones, everyone thought it was entirely Greece's fault, and the Dow shed almost 1,000 points. It recovered, but Greece's fate is not so assured. So what are the options? Well, many would like the European Central Bank to take the plunge and buy the unwanted bonds from Greece, not to mention Portugal, Spain and Italy as well. It would be costly. Just to buy Spanish bonds, according to one estimate, would be $600 billion. Meanwhile, back in Greece, the plans to introduce savage budget cuts have sparked violent protests in Athens. 3 people actually died in a bank after rioters broke a window and threw a petrol bomb inside. With more, our Athens correspondent, Barnaby Phillips.
This was the day when Greece's debt crisis spiraled out of control. Not on the markets, but here on the streets. This bank set on fire. The authorities say by protesters armed with Molotov cocktails. The bodies were retrieved a little later. These scenes, in the very heart of the capital, will shock Greeks.
Athens has a history of political violence, but serious injuries, let alone deaths, are extremely unusual. What happened here throws Greece's political crisis into a new and unexpected direction.
Earlier, a huge crowd came to Parliament, pouring scorn on those inside. They chanted "thieves," which is how many Greeks feel about their politicians. All the time, a large, orderly crowd was still filing into the square. But as the crowd pushed their way up the steps of Parliament, the police fought back with tear gas. But events moved fast and took a very ugly turn. Soon, vicious battles were breaking out across the city. All this in the heart of a major European capital.
Well, this march began peacefully, but you can see what is now happening outside the Greek Parliament. Of course, these scenes increase the political pressure on Prime Minister George Papandreou, and they're evidence of the social tensions in Greece at the moment.
Elsewhere, many people have been injured and there's been widespread vandalism. Parliament is due to vote this week on the austerity measures. A majority will surely support the government, but Greece, divided by despair and anger, is in turmoil.
Every citizen had the right to demonstrate, But no one has the right to violence, and certainly not to violence that leads to murder of fellow citizens. And you know that violence cultivates violence. A demonstration is one thing, and murder is quite another.
Well, earlier in the week, Shuli Ghosh caught up with the veteran investor Jim Rogers, a man who made his fortune in the 1980s from betting on commodities. Rogers, now based in Singapore, he's always believed the euro may not be around for long. Shuli put it to him that the Eurozone and the IMF's $146 billion bailout wasn't enough.
Spain, Portugal, Ireland, the UK, many countries have serious, the US have serious problems, and bailing out Greece, even if it works, is not going to be enough to take care of the rest of the world.
But
we have some serious
aren't the
imbalances.
Markets reassured by this this IMF and European rescue package?
Ms. Ghosh, are you assured? I mean, look at the numbers. There are well over 100 billion euros, which have to go to Greece. That's still not. Look at the numbers that the bank is putting out. That still is not enough to solve their debt problems. They still will have higher debt in 3 or 4 years than they have now. This is not solving Greece's problems. This is pushing the problems out into the future, and the politicians are hoping they'll be gone by then.
Well, I'm not an economist, but it seems to me that there could be bigger problems in letting Greece go bankrupt. I mean, that certainly was the fear of European leaders.
Well, quite the contrary. In my view, the best thing that could happen would be to let Greece go bankrupt. First of all, that would send a clear message to all the countries in Europe that you cannot use phony bookkeeping. You must pay your bills. You cannot spend money you don't have. And then everybody would know, foreign investors, domestic investors would know, the euro is going to be a sound currency. What this is doing is just weakening the euro from within, and eventually the euro will be destroyed from within.
But Jim, I mean, doesn't that just drive away investors from any country where there's any sign that they're in some kind of problem and no one's going to help them?
No, quite the contrary. Look, in the United States, for instance, we have 50 states. Throughout our history, we've had states go bankrupt. We've had cities go bankrupt. The United States didn't dissolve. The United States dollar didn't disappear. But those states and those cities which did things wrong had to shape up and do right. Eventually, of course, people went in and put new money into those things. That will happen in Europe, too. Countries have been going bankrupt, Ms. Ghosh, for decades, hundreds of years. It's not the first time something like this has happened, and it's not the end of the world.
It could be the first time it's happened to the euro, couldn't it? I mean, it's now at its lowest level against the dollar for months. And I know that you've said the euro's on its way out. It'll be a dead currency within 20 years.
Maybe even sooner at the rate things are going. Maybe within 20 months, the way things are going. I mean, if they come up with hundreds of billions of euros to push the problem away for Greece, what are they going to do when it's Spain and Portugal and Ireland and other countries? Though we're talking about staggering amounts of money, and the market just isn't going to put up with that much money, which people will have to print print. That's the only way they can get that kind of money.
So what's your forecast for Europe then? What's ahead?
Well, I suspect that somehow or another this is going to be papered over and that things will look better for a while. It's long-term corrosion of the euro from within. As you mentioned, in a few years, I don't expect there to be a euro because they keep weakening it from within.
But, you know, even when a country's on its knees, suffering from years of stagnation or economic decline, it can find people willing to invest in it. Usually, though, you'd expect huge interest rates on the money loaned. But then there are the funds that take advantage of such situations. They're called vulture funds. They acquire debt of third world nations for pennies on the dollar and then pursue them through the courts for a whole lot more. Yvonne Ndege has this from Liberia.
The burnt-out shell of an old building in the Liberian capital, Monrovia. The ruins a reminder of a 14-year-long civil war that ended in 2003. A prosperous economy built on the exports of rubber, diamonds and gold collapsed, creating widespread poverty and an economy heavily dependent on foreign donors. Liberia has been trying to rebuild, but now debts it racked up before the war are threatening to undo its recent economic gains. Creditors in the Caribbean are pursuing Liberia for $20 million for a loan that when the country took it in 1978 was just $6 million. Creditors are known as vulture funds.
Our appeal is, give a struggling country a break. We're trying to come out of a, 25-year economic decline and just trying to make it restoring basic services to our people. that have been denied this for so long, educating our young people. It's unconscionable.
In November 2009, two Vulture funds, Hamsar Investments and Wall Capital Limited, took Liberia to court in Britain. Liberia was ordered to pay the $20 million. The president says they can't afford it. Liberia may have been thrown a lifeline by British parliamentarians. In April, they passed a law banning Vulture funds from pursuing debt cases against poor countries through the British courts, throwing into doubt the November 2009 judgment ordering Liberia to pay the $20 million. But the Vulture funds may not give up so easily. They know Liberia has some money, evidenced by recent corruption scandals.
I know there will be those who are unsympathetic and say Africa wastes its resources, African leaders or governments are corrupt, and therefore let them pay. I hope there will be more people who will see it the way we see it and will help us to solve this problem.
The Vulture funds could now take their case to courts in the US, and if they succeed, it will deepen the hardship just when Liberians thought things were getting better.
And finally this week, if you fly United Airlines in the future, look closely at the company's logo. If it looks like that of rival Continental Airlines, well, you're onto something. That something being the merger of two of the US's leading airlines. United and Continental have now formed the world's largest commercial air carrier, the former buying the latter for more than $3 billion. Paddy Culhane with more from Washington, D.C.
Happy birthday. Anytime.
It hasn't always been a smooth process, but after 2 years of on-again, off-again talks, the bosses of Continental and United Airlines announce a massive merger.
So let's fly together.
Let's
we'll open up for questions.
Flying together will create the world's largest airline. Some analysts say it could be good for global travelers.
What could happen, what I hope will emerge from this, is that we will have some fantastic deals for people in around-the-world airfares.
But there are questions about what it could do to domestic travelers. Two airlines becoming one means fewer choices for travelers and possibly higher fares, a concern the CEOs dismissed, saying this large company will bring stability to an industry that has been hit hard by the global recession, fewer travelers, and roller coaster fuel prices.
We do not set prices. We didn't set prices in the market before this transaction. We won't set prices in the market after this transaction. We respond to customer demand. This is a brutally competitive industry.
But if this deal goes through, there will be less competition, which is why the U.S. Justice Department has to approve the more than $3 billion sale to make sure in the end the world's largest airline doesn't become too powerful to be the only company deciding how much you'll pay to get from point A to point B and everywhere in between.
Remember to check out Counting the Cost online. Here's our main page. You get there from the programs link at aljazeera.net/English. There are blogs, video content, profiles, broadcast times up there for you. And we're on Twitter as well. Keep an eye on the latest news, coming stories. You can send us your suggestions there too. @AJCountingCost is the name to look for on Twitter. But that is it from Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.